Most of the time, we tend to think about anxiety as coming from the mind. But in addition to the mind, anxiety can literally come from our body. Physiologic anxiety is a physical danger response triggered by our body in generally inappropriate circumstances. The term physiologic anxiety tends to confuse people because, especially in the West, psychiatry and psychology presumes that anxiety is mental in nature. After all, if you have anxiety, you see a mental health professional, not a diet or physiology professional. And this is what creates such a bad anxiety epidemic. We've only focused our solutions on half of the sources of anxiety. And this isn't really anything against, therapists or psychiatrists or psychologists, but our entire understanding of anxiety, the way that we train our anxiety treatment professionals, is heavily focused on cognition with very little training in the underlying physiology that sort of governs an anxiety response. So when we're faced with danger, our body activates a set of physiological pathways to prepare us to fight or run away. The problem with anxiety is that it activates this danger circuit inappropriately. It does this because somewhere along the way, our brain thought or learned that a particular benign circumstance was actually dangerous. So understanding the origins of these can be an important part of a long-term plan of decoupling this stress reaction. By acclimatizing to the anxiety trigger, you can actually disable this whole process. So let's review what happens when the danger response triggers. We're going to focus on three components. And when the danger response triggers, it activates three major hormones: adrenaline, cortisol, and activates a part of our brain called the reticular activating formation. So let's start with adrenaline. Adrenaline is secreted by our adrenal glands, and adrenaline activates in less than a second. It flushes through our body and gives us a sudden bank of energy, increases our heart rate, boosts our blood pressure, causes us to sweat, which is called diaphoresis, and essentially preps our body for immediate responses to danger. Adrenaline literally happens faster than the speed of thought. So here are a couple of interesting features about adrenaline. One is that it actually collapses our peripheral vision from 180 degrees down to 30 degrees. Our pupils become dilated, and we're incredibly focused on what is in front of us. And the interesting thing is that this kind of narrowing of our focus and collapsing of peripheral vision also happens cognitively. When we're in a state of anxiety, there are literally hormones flushing through our system that cause us to hyper-focus on particular thoughts and think in terms of black and white. And cognitively, we don't view the world with kind of a wide perspective anymore. We sort of really tunnel in on one thing. So if you pay attention to your own anxiety, or you pay attention to other people, maybe friends of yours who've experienced anxiety, they have a lot of trouble unlatching or widening their view, right? They're just hyper laser focused on one thing. The other thing that adrenaline does is makes us feel like perceived danger is real danger. So it blurs the lines between hypothesis and reality. Consider running into a tiger in the woods. Even if the tiger doesn't attack you right away, you treat the tiger as a lethal threat. You act as if it is lethal, even though clearly it's not lethal yet. I mean, you're still alive. So technically the tiger is not lethal, but when I say if you encounter a tiger in the woods and you treat it as lethal, it makes perfect sense, right? So in reality, you could be perfectly safe. It may be not hungry at all. The tiger may be scared of you or sick. But in your mind, when you have adrenaline pumping through your blood, a hypothetical danger becomes a real danger. And this is what makes anxiety so crippling. It is literally a switch in your brain that blurs the line between what is possible and what is real. And all of that is triggered by adrenaline. So in addition to adrenaline, we've also got another important stress hormone that the danger circuitry activates, which is called cortisol. Cortisol is a long-term stress hormone. So if we think about it, adrenaline gives us the energy that we need to survive for the first 5 minutes. And cortisol is what keeps us alive over the next 24 hours. So let's go back to our tiger example. When we run into a tiger, we need adrenaline to, activate our heart rate send blood to our muscles, and run away from the tiger. And then we need a whole host of other responses from our body to keep us alive over that next 24-hour period. So we're gonna need a sustained level of energy so that we can cover a lot of ground and get away from that tiger. We're also gonna need to activate our immune system, because oftentimes when we run into dangers in the wild, we can get scratches, cuts, maybe bites, and so our immune system needs to be on high alert and keep us alive. And so if we look at what cortisol does, it actually acts on both of these systems. And this was great when we sort of like lived in the wilderness and we ran into a tiger every now and then. But nowadays, the nature of anxiety and stress is that it's constant. So instead of temporary dangers, we're dealing with problems like making rent at the end of the month. So it's 2 weeks of constant anxiety and stress. Am I gonna be alone for the rest of my life? So it's sort of constant anxiety about finding a partner. Or how am I gonna pay off my student loans? And so these circuits in our brain were not designed to be on all the time, but the current society we live in has us feeling anxiety on a daily basis and activating cortisol on a daily basis. So let's take a quick look at what cortisol does. The first thing that we're gonna look at is metabolism. And cortisol is all about sacrificing long-term health for short-term survival. Remember, with the tiger, we want plenty of energy so that our muscles can walk for like 8 miles, and we want to get far away from the tiger. So what cortisol does is signals our muscle and fat to actually break down and for us to dump glucose into our bloodstream. The reason we want to dump glucose into our bloodstream is so that our muscles have a constant source of fuel and all the energy that they will ever need. And this worked great when we actually walked 8 miles during a stressful period. But now what happens is we flush our body with glucose, and then we sit there. And so then our body gets really, really confused. And if it's full of glucose, then our body is thinking like, okay, my blood is full of glucose, I must have just eaten a meal. And then it actually activates another hormone called insulin, which stores all of that glucose as fat. So I know it sounds really bizarre, but cortisol actually transforms our muscle into fat. And this is all mediated by stress and anxiety. The second thing that we're gonna look at is the immune system. Because if you look at anxiety, anxiety has something that in medicine we call a comorbidity, which means that people who have anxiety also tend to suffer from other kinds of problems. They can suffer from skin problems, GI problems, and what we'll discover is that all of that is mediated by cortisol as well. So one of the things that cortisol does is in anticipation for potential infections, because when we run into a tiger, we're gonna run away, we're gonna get scraped, we're gonna get bruised, we may fall down, we may get clawed or even bitten. And so what our body wants to do is prep our immune system for high activity. And so we have these little cells in our body called white blood cells, which are basically the soldiers of the immune system. And you have some of your white blood cells active at any given time, but most of them are held in reserve. And so cortisol does something called demarginalization of white blood cells. And when our white blood cells get demarginalized, that means they get activated. So what cortisol will do is actually get all of your immune system in high gear. And this, once again, used to be fantastic because we used to get cuts and scrapes and bruises and we didn't have things like antibiotics when we were evolving. So now we have our immune system on high alert, but in today's society, there's nothing for them to fight against. So what they actually end up doing is attacking healthy tissue and worsening autoimmune diseases. So what we see in people who have anxiety is that they have a lot of problems with their skin. They have a lot of problems with their stomach and GI system, and that's mediated by cortisol as well. So the goal of cortisol is essentially to keep you alive over a short period of time by sacrificing your long-term health. And if we're thinking about anxiety, what we really want to do is stop that process, because half of what we suffer from when we think about the consequences of anxiety have to do with cortisol. The third thing that we're going to talk about isn't really a hormone, but is actually a part of your brain called the reticular activating formation. And the RAF is the part of your brain that governs sleep and wakefulness. And so let's think a little bit about this, right? So if we run into a tiger, that pro-anxiety kind of state is going to make it so that our RAF is hypersensitive. Because the night that you ran into a tiger, you don't want to be sleeping very heavily. You want to sleep very lightly. You want to sleep for just a couple of hours because your body and your brain are going to be concerned that the tiger is somewhere around you. So what's going to happen is your RAF is going to activate, and it's going to make sleeping very difficult. And we can see how anxiety actually makes it hard for people to go to sleep, because when your anxiety activates, all of these different parts of your brain and your physiology are going to activate. So the RAF is going to do things like keep you kind of at this very high level of kind of mental alertness and make it very hard for you to relax, because we don't want to relax. Our brain doesn't want to relax when there's a tiger nearby. So when we have anxiety, our RAF activates and really impacts things like sleep, thus preventing all of the benefits of a good night's rest. When we don't have a good night's rest, that actually makes us feel kind of mentally frayed and worn down and gives anxiety further fertile ground to kind of grow up in. So this has kind of been a quick summary of some of the physiologic effects of anxiety. And part of the reason that we kind of go into this is because I want you all to understand that anxiety is not just about what's in your head, that you literally have hormones, chemicals, and parts of your brain that are going to be making your anxiety worse. And so if we really think about how to tackle your anxiety, we're going to actually want to address physiology as well. And so then the next question becomes, okay, how do we do that? So that's why we're going to teach you so many different meditation techniques. Meditation techniques to help you calm down your mind and fall asleep that may target the RAF. Meditation techniques that are going to literally shut off your sympathetic nervous system. And when you shut off your sympathetic nervous system, the adrenaline is going to go down. Meditation techniques that are supposed to quote unquote de-stress you. There are some studies that show that particular meditation techniques will actually shut off cortisol production from your brain. And when we shut off cortisol, we shut off all of that priming, pro-anxious kind of activity. So when we really think about a comprehensive approach to anxiety, we're going to teach you a lot about the mind, and by all means, go see a therapist. But I don't want y'all to leave some of these other solutions behind, because anxiety is not just a mental problem. It's absolutely a physical problem as well. So in addition to adrenaline, this danger circuit activates a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol is a long-term stress hormone. Adrenaline is what's responsible for keeping us alive for the first 5 minutes. And then, damn it. And I got a fart too. Oh my God. Okay. Out both ends. Okay. So, all right, let's get started again. Yeah, I would definitely maintain a 6-foot distance. I may need a mask. Can we do a take with a mask?